This video is brought to you by NordVPN. Last month, after weeks of negotiations, Benjamin Netanyahu was sworn in as Israel's Prime Minister for the 6th time in his life. Centrists and left-leaning parties refused to serve under Netanyahu, who's currently on trial for corruption and bribery, which means that he's had to rely on a bunch of right-wing and Israeli nationalist parties for his majority. Despite Netanyahu's promises to both the Israeli public and the foreign press that he'd keep his new ministers on a tight leash, after just a few weeks in power, the new government is already causing controversy all over the place. And they're quickly losing favour with both the Israeli public and Israel's Arab neighbours. So in this video, we're going to have a look at Netanyahu's new coalition, why they've already caused so much upset, and what impact all this could have on the wider region. So, to understand why this new government is so right-wing, you need a bit of context. Basically, since 2019, Israel has struggled to form a stable government because most mainstream parties have refused to work with Benjamin Netanyahu, who's currently on trial for charges of corruption and bribery. Despite his legal troubles, a plurality of between 25 and 30% of Israelis still support Netanyahu's Likud party, and this made forming a coalition without them very difficult. Israel suffered through 4 elections in 2 years trying to sort this out, and the opposition parties finally agreed to a diverse coalition government composed of 8 parties, including the right-wing Israeli National Party, Yamina, and Arab Islamic Party, Ram. In normal times, these guys wouldn't be mates, but they were so fed up with Netanyahu and the preceding political chaos that they agreed to suck it up despite their ideological diversity. Inevitably, however, the coalition eventually collapsed, leading to more elections at the end of last year. Again, Likud won about 25% of the vote, but this time Netanyahu decided to form a government by allying with a whole load of right-wing Israeli nationalist parties. In the past, Netanyahu has avoided forming coalitions with the far right, but he apparently realised that this was his only way back to power. So that's what he did. The elections happened in November, and after about 2 months of negotiations, in late December, Netanyahu announced his cabinet, which included some pretty controversial characters. Perhaps most controversial, though, is Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's been indicted 53 times and was previously convicted of incitement to racism. Just a few days after the election, Ben-Gvir hit the headlines by attending a memorial for Mir Kahan, an Israeli ultra-nationalist and founder of the Kach movement, who supported the expulsion of all Arabs from Israel and was convicted for plotting to blow up the Libyan embassy in Brussels. Then, a month or so later, Ben-Gvir again made the front pages by visiting the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This might not sound controversial, given that it's considered a holy site by both Jews and Muslims, but since Israel occupied East Jerusalem in the 60s, there's been an understanding that only Muslims are permitted to pray at the site. Tensions over the mosque have risen in recent years, as growing numbers of ultra-nationalists have tried to pray at the site, and Israeli security forces have become more muscular in their guarding of the compound. But until Ben-Gvir, politicians had, for the most part, refrained from visiting to avoid inflaming tensions. Ben-Gvir has visited the site before, but never as a minister, and apparently wants to change the status quo to allow Jews to pray there as well. On top of this, Netanyahu's legislative agenda is nearly as controversial as his cabinet. His government allegedly wants to expel over 1,000 Palestinians living in Masafah Yatta, which the Israeli Defense Forces consider a military training area, and withhold tens of millions of dollars of tax revenue from the Palestinian Authority, the body responsible for limited Palestinian self-rule, in retaliation for its request for a judicial review of Israel's occupation at the United Nations. Netanyahu also wants to pass a law to allow the Knesset to overrule the Supreme Court with a simple majority, which would completely transform Israel's constitution. While there are good faith criticisms to be made of Israel's Supreme Court, Netanyahu's reforms are at least partly motivated by the fact that both his health minister and Netanyahu himself are currently struggling with legal issues, and this new law would protect them. Unsurprisingly, all this hasn't gone down too well with the Israeli public. After just a few weeks in office, polling from Israel's Channel 13 released on Sunday found that the new government would lose its majority if another election was held today. Only 21% of Israelis approve of the new government, compared to 55% who disapprove, and polling suggests that basically all of its key policies are unpopular. Some 80,000 Israelis took to the streets in Tel Aviv last weekend to protest the new law allowing the Knesset to override the Supreme Court, including a former justice minister and a former Supreme Court president. Benny Gantz, leader of the opposition National Unity Party, warned that the government was responsible for a civil war brewing in Israeli society. Netanyahu's new government isn't going down much better with the international community. Relations with Arab countries, which were improving under the previous government, have soured. The Saudis criticised Ben-Gvir's trip to Al-Aqsa as a provocative action, and the UAE postponed a diplomatic meeting due last week. Even the US, which is usually pretty pro-Israel, warned that Ben-Gvir's trip was, quote, unacceptable, and a delegation of visiting pro-Israeli senators apparently refused to meet with either Ben-Gvir or the finance minister because they're considered too right-wing. This isn't good news for Netanyahu. Domestically, his popularity is waning, and his reputation as an effective manager is being undermined by his ministers' stunts. When he came to power, Netanyahu told the press that his coalition partners were joining him, he wasn't joining them, and that he'd have, quote, two hands on the steering wheel. Clearly, this hasn't happened, in part because his ministers know that he needs them for his slight majority in the Knesset. Internationally, Israel needs the support of the US and its neighbours to counterbalance the rise of a nuclear Iran, which could happen as soon as this year, and Netanyahu knows this. Anyway, you get the point. Netanyahu's new government is making waves, and it's an open question as to whether Bibi can steady the ship. So it looks like Israel's fifth election in 3 years hasn't really solved much. And with their political crisis seemingly continuing into 2023, it's easy to feel like the world is an increasingly unsafe place. Fortunately, when it comes to your personal life and digital safety, NordVPN has your back. It's an unfortunate reality that online scams and phishing attacks are on the rise right now. With us getting bombarded by emails from our banks, social media accounts, and even annoying newsletters we forgot we even signed up to, it's easy to click the wrong thing. One weak link can compromise security and bring things crashing down. With the protection of NordVPN, though, you can use their threat protection features to identify potentially suspicious links. Even if you did reach a suspicious website, NordVPN's data encryption tools would protect against a number of other attacks like malicious man-in-the-middle breaches. Even if things do go wrong, NordVPN's dark web monitoring is always scanning for your details and passwords, and can actively notify you before you even notice. It's easy to think that it won't happen to you, or that you won't be fooled, but these scams are pretty subtle, and when we see even massive firms falling for it, it's worth protecting yourself as much as you can. So click the link in the description or go to nordvpn.com/TLDR to get a huge discount on their 2-year plan, and with their 30-day money-back guarantee, you've got nothing to lose. Thanks for your support, and make sure to click the link in the description.